I wouldn't even talk anymore to these guys. I would really try to put it in 2 slides, 2 pictures that really show end to end from a strategy all the way to achieving outcomes and what is needed there. How are these initiatives? We're not just coming up with initiatives. We're coming up with them because there's clarity of what we want to accomplish and why.
Coming right at you, the PM Cowboy Podcast. Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming right back to you with another podcast. We have an incredible privilege today to have, like always, a great guest on board. We'll introduce him in just a moment. Our first podcast was somebody who was involved with Siemens at a very, very high level, program and portfolio management. That time it was in Europe. This time we have the privilege of introducing a longtime associate of mine, Al Zeitoun. Al Zeitoun, I have to get my notes out, Al, because you have such an illustrious title. Global Leader, Senior Director, Strategy, Execution, Operational Excellence, and Program Management. That's a mouthful. I'm sure all the ears of all the people who are looking at this podcast just went like this, right? Oh my God, this is another OG project management cowboy coming to us with lots of wisdom, real life wisdom. Al, welcome on board.
Mark, it's a pleasure. The last thing I was trying to figure out before we got on is like, how long have I known you, Mark? And how long have we interacted? Sorry, my goodness. I choke even to think about the number of years. And I don't want to date ourselves too much. But
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah.
We kind of indirectly did some worked in a company together, although we never had any direct interaction, but we've always run over past each other in the past. And I always have you in fond memory as being a gregarious, open, committed evangelist for the subject matter that I'm also in love with. So welcome on board.
Thank you. No, super excited, and I'm glad you've had continuously a lot of really committed, passionate speakers, and I'm honored to be one of them. So let's get on with it.
Yeah. So we have a basic framework to this podcast. We can be adaptive, which is another bingo word that we constantly use. Maybe just so that I'm always a big fan of when before people talk, and not enough people do this. I always want to know who is this person that's talking? What's their background? Okay. The list of your CV is a mile long, but I prefer that you put it into your own words. Kind of give us maybe a short synopsis of your CV and what I like to call your passion journey.
Fantastic. Thank you. I love that expression too, passion journey. Hey, Mark, it's really interesting. So I think it's almost one of those situations where you cannot separate the person from what he or she are committed to. So somehow with the upbringing and with my maybe dad instilling a lot of things in me in this space, something has always clicked in terms of the systems management or the system view of life and of the things that I do. So I grew up in Egypt. I'm a global citizen, live in the US. I'm an American for a long time. And truly as a person, someone who loves to find ways by which you make sense out of chaos, someone who through over the years, the engineering discipline that I was fortunate to have managed to find that that kind of a help is needed for organizations, for individuals, for teams. And truly, the more I got into it, the more I got humbled in the fact that, oh my God, there's a lot to know. So I'm a great learner. I hope I can put myself in that category. I love learning. I'm hoping throughout the career that started in engineering, went into construction, went into manufacturing, went into product development, went into delivering training and consultancy globally, to ultimately also in between always go to industry. Because what I find very enriching is to not lose touch of the reality on the ground and don't end up being totally theoretical or academic.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so excited to have you on board, because that's what we have in common. That's where the title PM Cowboy, by the way, comes from, this concept. There's a lot of things. I know that you read a lot. You've written a book, which we're going to talk about in this pod. I'm really thrilled to talk about the book. So you have a really a well-founded academic background, University of Mannheim, Oklahoma State University. which I looked up. I didn't realize that. We're close to home because Texas is my home state. You have also an extended relationship to another famous project management cowboy, Professor Kurtzner, right? So you have a well-established academic background. You've worked for some incredibly reputable companies, also a very reputable consulting firm. So you've got the academic background, but what I'm so thrilled to have you on board is you're that bridge between the academic perspective and the reality. And I think that's what people hunger for. They hunger for, you know what, I can read the PMBOK, I can read a book, but where do I read between the lines, right?
Yes. No, that's what excites me the most. Now looking forward to that. Yeah. Perfect.
So that's your academic background. Let's jump right into it. Let's jump into your present function so that we kind of get an orientation that'll kind of, I think, lead us into the topic. You've got an incredibly long title. I've got a couple questions because there's a lot of things that I read between the lines which are exciting for this topic. Tell us in your own words, what is your function at Siemens right now?
Yeah, so it's really in the strategy organization. It's more in the software organization, which is part of our digital industries. Siemens is becoming very much of a technology company. I think that's why our organization or our business unit is right at the center of driving their transformation. I personally am part of a very interesting team that does drive our transformation, our cascading of that strategy into what we do and how we run our portfolio and how to also instill the muscle of program management. That's really, dear to my heart naturally. I'm also changing roles. Part of that adaptability started the program with. So in this FY, I'm going to start focusing on other things. The last FY fiscal year, I was focusing more on what's called the product introduction process, which is part of the.
Well, one of your. I think the reason I'm asking is if I read your title, I see 4 job titles.
So let's in the current and into the future.
One is the digital transformation, which is this topic all by itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then I see OPEX, and I want to pick your brain what you understand on OPEX, because I think that's the new bingo word that people need to be familiar with. Operational excellence. The crossover between change management and project management that a lot of people are not aware of. They also comes the whole, what does lean have to do with project management? I think there's a lot of gold there. And then what I find interesting is I believe that your title at some point or other was portfolio manager, but it changed to program manager. So I want to pick your brain on that as well.
Very true. No, so I think what we're doing is we're realizing the portfolio management piece. So let's pick on that first. Is a humongous amount of continual improvement effort, right? It's not like it's a new thing to either Siemens or to our business unit, but what we're trying to do is become a bit more end-to-end, a bit more disciplined at it, right? Which is natural to many global great organizations. So we're expanding the team, and I'm also, in a way, handing that responsibility off to another leader we've added to the team with my interaction with her in this case to be very supportive in the kinds of change management we need to do. Okay. Right. So now my shift is more program management.
You're a wealth of information. So let me make sure that our readers, our listeners can follow you.
Yeah.
You're in North America, so you're responsible for the IT in North America. Is that correct?
No, I'm in North America, but it's a very global organization.
So it's global.
Absolutely. So I interact with folks on the ground in Germany and other parts of the world.
So it spans the whole globe, everything that has to do with the IT. What's the name of the IT? I used to remember a long time ago, but I think they've changed the name. What's the name of the IT organization at Siemens?
We hardly talk about IT. So digital industries, right? So
digital industries
is the overarching division, and we in the software we're only part of that. So.
Okay. So for those of our listeners and viewers that are still, kind of using the maybe the cookie cutter terminology, are you guys a PMO?
Yeah, so that's a great one. And actually, I just got back from PMI Global Summit, for this year, and I tell you, I was honored also to be on what's called the PMO Insights team. Right, had a very great interaction there. I think the word PMO, and I'm sure we're going to get more into that later on, is only a vehicle amongst many. I think the PMOs are in a massive fork in the road. So definitely massive reinvention is needed. Yes, you can. I mean, because right now with my program management focus, you can use that word, right? So if somebody talks about Al's role, well, Al is a PMO, right? So what does that mean? But
you guys don't call it a project management office. You call it a program management office.
Absolutely. That's for sure. Because the reason I even joined the company is really that program management muscle. Project management, I'm not disqualifying it. It's very important. It still has that tactical sense to it. And we're trying to make sure everything we do is linked to strategy and to value, which I'm happy to dive into, of course, along the way.
So let me ask you another couple stupid questions, which are important.
No such thing.
One of the things I do is I've worked with over the last 30 years with a number of different companies creating PMOs. And one of the things that we're looking at is that there's different levels of PMOs, right? So there's operational PMOs that might be on-site, on location. Then you might have regional or business unit PMOs that kind of have the business unit in mind or a sub-portfolio. And then this is where I find it rare, and I think that we've hit one of those rare people and functions. You have what I like to call an executive PMO, okay? Somebody that works on a global span and has direct access to executives. Are you one of those?
So, Mark, how about I destroy all that and completely disrupt that mindset? So I am not in disagreement with anything you've said. The one thing, the and here is that I'm a firm believer of the three letters FIT, right? So fit, right? So to me, the challenge PMOs have had over the years was exactly along the lines of the labeling exercise. And I'm a firm believer it's a maturity exercise, it's a culture exercise, and it's a readiness exercise on the part of the organization. Which means I've done all of it. Like day one, the very first PMO when I got my PMP, and I'm not going to give you the year because it's a long time ago, and I got a recruiter from California calling me while I was in Wichita.
It was one of your first jobs.
Yeah, exactly. For a job in Indianapolis to head a PMO. That organization had no business in really getting into a PMO space because they had no understanding of what is, anything but the very fundamental, hey, let's police some meetings. Let's make sure the guys on the shop floor in that case know exactly what they have to do. That is absolutely, maybe theoretically for that culture, what was needed at the time. But I learned from that lesson by truly focusing on what not to do, which is absolutely missing the beat in terms of what the stakeholders are ready for and what they need. You go from there to one of the most mature ones I ran a few years back in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, when I was actually in charge of what's called a central program management office.
That's when you were working for the Atomic Energy Agency.
Absolutely, for the nuclear industry in Abu Dhabi. But that was the closest actually because of access as well. I mean, Siemens is quite a large organization, so definitely we can talk a bit about that too. But there, it became a very executive impact. You talk about disrupting how a board of director operates, where their entire way of operating is governing around what the EPMO, if we want to call it that at that time, is driving upwards in terms of key strategic risks for the organization, in terms of changing the dialogue in the boardroom, in terms of really digitizing exactly the linkages between the ins and out of every single risk, activity, initiative to the specific goals of the organization, to the ultimate outcome. So the ideal case scenario, right, of truly having your dream come true, let's call it, in terms of making sure the organization is well connected, very much project, program, portfolio driven, which is your passion and mine as PM Cowboy, let's call it. Yeah.
Can I throw something in? I'm gonna throw in a sentiment. I mean, you and I are old diehard PMI associates. You at a much more regional and also an executive level. I was more on a local and European level. I think we're all well of the landscape of certifications and standards. One of the things that I always bemused when I look at the standards of PMI, and I'm a great fan of them, is the PMBOK keeps growing every 5 years, right? I think we're close to 3 different books and 1,000 pages or something like that. But if you look at the standard for program management and portfolio management, and you see how it has not increased in the last couple decades, my question is, are people missing the boat here? I mean, I like what you said beforehand, where you're not distancing yourself from projects, but you say I think what you addressed when you talked about how programs are more important, and your book kind of goes into this, is one of the biggest problems that projects have is that they have a beginning and an end. Right?
Yeah.
But the strategic initiative has a much longer life cycle. You spent a whole chapter on life cycles in your book, right? So, and also the integration of is there a more permanent organization within the organization that keeps an overview of these programs and is tied into the executive and senior management decision-making process. I like to make it quite simple. When I talk to clients, I talk to them at many different levels. I talk to project assistants sometimes, and sometimes I get all the way up to the board. I always like to not piss them off a little bit, but I like to tickle them a little bit. You know, I love to say, listen, are projects important? Yeah, projects are important. We're a matrix organization. 90% of the people who use that word don't know what it means. And then I say, okay, can you tell me how many projects you have in your portfolio? And everybody they lean back and they look at each other, and it goes, I wasn't ready for that question. They go, no. I said, do you have somebody that's doing your program management, portfolio management? I think if we're going to look and you also have a chapter on the future, and I want to hear what you say to it. I think one of the things we need to look at the future, I think we really need to pick up the pace when it comes to understanding program management potential, portfolio management potential, operational excellence, or the crossover to other, like the change management and lean aspect, because those are twins that they can't be separate. They shouldn't be separated, right? And then you've also alluded something that Siemens has always been really good at. Wolfgang Gaschke, the first guy I had the podcast with, he was originally a lawyer. He was responsible first for risk, then he was responsible for quality. And he said, while we're at it, let's throw project management into the fold. And I think unbeknownst to them, it was a great marriage, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there, Mark.
Yeah. So I think the big problem, you look at the standard of program management at PMI, it's this thick. If you look at the one for portfolio, it's this thick. By the way, for anybody who's wondering, is there a better book out there for program management? We're going to introduce one, right?
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. So listen, you've shared a lot there, and I don't want to be misunderstood that I don't believe in project or project management. Yeah. I just think it's 2023. Yeah. Is when we're recording this. And I hope that in 5-6 years from now, we're not going to have similar discussions, because you've tackled so much in your comments right now. And maybe before I go back to standards and PMI, even this comment you made about matrix, how is it possible that with all the successes many of the world organizations have, that we still don't have that muscle developed working across organizational boundaries, with almost dismantling of what still remains to be, whether it's a mindset blocker, whether it's ways of working blocker, whether it's, totally missing the beat in terms of the empowerment and the dynamic ways of working that we have to have in our organization. So that's an entire point that we have to tackle. And I cannot believe execs and others don't make that one of their top strategic priorities. Luckily, I work with many execs who really get it and are trying their hardest to do that. Lots of things stand in the way sometimes of accomplishing that. Back to the standards and program and portfolio, etc. At the end of the day, the insanity aspect goes back to simple principles outside our field. A guy like Simon Sinek, why did that thought process succeeded so much with the why principle? Starting with why. Why is that a big deal? Well, it's a big deal. I thought
it was pretty basic. I'm like, is that all he's got?
Exactly. So the reason it's a big deal in our world is that if you look at failure rates of these projects, right, and even programs, it's really around that core principle, which is, did you nail it in terms of why you're starting this? Did you really do enough in the business case and the positioning, et cetera, of these projects and programs to know better? So I'm saying there should be absolutely no difference in approaching something that has a beginning to an end, because it's really an investment. Yeah. Anytime I'm making a choice, which elevates that to the portfolio immediately, choices are the hardest part of the equation. Choices in this quote unquote project economy that many talk about for years now have to do with some basic principles of, we have, no matter what we like to believe, we have limited resources, we have priorities that we have to achieve. We've got to be, for a lack of a better word, ruthless in prioritization, and that prioritization distills itself into initiatives. Some of them are going to be done. Some of them are going to interact. Some of them are dealing with other operational, competing demands. But at the end of the day, we got to look at this end to end, and that's the most important thing. And
this is the second time you've used the word end to end. A lot of people might have a vague concept what that means. Also, I think it really depends on what organization you're with. I know, for example, one of the clients that I work with, also a very large multinational company about the same size as Siemens, uses the word end to end, and it literally means a program manager for them. Is that how you guys use the word end to end?
Well, you would imagine with the size of the organization and still the varying levels of, maturity, still even in a construct of the organization, it's used so many different ways. Matter of fact, also, if you talk about it purely from a technology standpoint, it means something very different than looking at it from the lens of programs as well. Whether I use it or not, I think you used the word integration earlier, which is, again, could be interpreted so many different ways, whether we're talking about purely technology-wise or we're talking about it in terms of the integration you and I talk about within the portfolio and the program. My view, though, is that we have done a very good job thinking about customers. We've done an excellent job improving the investments we have in stakeholders and how we engage them, etc. We've done a very good job trying to distill the complexity down to a level of simplicity and so forth. So to me, end to end is really looking at what is the most fitting amount of rigor, discipline, focus, that allows me to achieve outcomes and value to customers, key stakeholders, right? And doing whatever it takes in between, right?
You're alluding to a hot topic, but I want to once again, for our listeners, I want to create a basic structure.
Yeah.
Your program management office, okay? How many staff members do you have? And let me maybe this will help you a little bit. Are you familiar with a book called what's it called? Business Model Generation?
Yes, absolutely.
I love that book
right
because it's
probably right somewhere. Right.
Yeah, it's one of those simple books that does that. Like you said, you alluded to Simon Sinek. Sometimes the simple cosmic questions are what creates an understanding, a framework, right?
Yeah.
What I love about that business model generation, I use it to design the business case of a PMO.
Yeah.
So maybe not in great detail, but can you give us kind of an overview? What is the business model of your program management office? What does it do? Who does it serve?
Right. So a couple of things. Number one, as much as I'm a strong believer of the business case, I think the PMO speaks for itself if it creates the right impact, right? So if you design and prove, even at a very small scale, the ability to connect your key decision makers and senior stakeholders to the impact, you don't even have to sell. That's the best thing. Actually,
but that's quite towards the tail end, or you have to have executives who understand that by just saying it.
But that's what I'm going to leave Siemens aside for a bit because we're reinventing how we look at that and how we structure it. But let's go back to ENIC for a minute, the nuclear industry, right? So size-wise, very quickly, I had 40 directly reporting to me, and then I have extended another 100 indirectly, really participating in the PMO activities at that point, right? Did I have to sell it? Absolutely not. You got a CEO who was really committed to this space, who hunted me from the consulting industry at the time, right? And said, this is what you're going to do. He understood PMI. He was practicing the PMBOK guide. How many CEOs do you have like that, right?
Yeah, God, I wish. I wish. Let me throw a question, if I may. Yeah. Was he your sponsor? Because this is the number one question we always look for sponsors for project. Who's your PMO sponsor? Was he your sponsor?
Directly the CEO, even though we didn't like.
Mashallah.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. But also, you got to step up, right? Yeah. He had extreme expectations. He was never fully happy with the PMO, right? I'm very candid and frank, which is absolutely fine. But at the end of the day, the PMO did what it needed to do, which is change the entire culture and the way of working towards that clarity of projects and programs driving the whole darn thing, right? Integrating across the corporate, the program. We had many program offices. So we have a program office at that time for the readiness and the nuclear readiness, right? Mm-hmm. So what ended up being called NAWA as an organization. We had a PMO on site, of course, dealing with the 4 nuclear power plants at the time. And then we had the corporate, right? So I was the integration amongst those.
So let's use typical PMI language. I mean, it's a little bit simplistic, but from the PMBOK, PMBOK says a PMO has 3 core functions, right? Support, control, governance. The third is wishful thinking in most organizations. Did you have all 3?
Absolutely. In that case, actually, and beyond. because the PMO is driving how even the board can excel its own governance, right? So, so that's why. So finding that golden opportunity, realizing the scaling that could happen and the impact that could be created, but avoiding the mistakes that we all have, which is being in a place where you are hated because no one understands even what you're bringing to the organization, right?
They think it's geeky and operational.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think I always love to find simple definitions for what we do so that lay persons can also understand it.
Sure.
One of the things that I learned from a university professor many, many years ago that I continually always use to understand the complexity of modern matrix organizations is what he used to call the Tower of Babylon, this concept that at the very core, you kind of alluded to it, part of the cultural DNA that kind of makes matrix organizations difficult to implement is that most organizations, even if they claim to be matrix, are in their core culture and their core DNA functional line organizations.
Yeah.
Because that's what we've learned over thousands of years.
Right.
But that doesn't work for dynamics. We're going to talk about VUCA and variations of it in just a little bit. And the problem is they talk about matrix organization, which means now they have to have split personalities. They have to be flexible and they have to be steady, and that's something that a lot of organizations can't do. And I always find it funny that the number one thing missing in PMOs is this ability to also have governance, to have that support. So this pyramid says what's called, they used to call it the Tower of Babylon. Every layer speaks a different language. And integration, I love the word integration. I don't think people understand how powerful that word is. It literally means that you have to be able to connect the executive to the senior, to the middle management, to the experts, to the staff vertically with rapid communication, but you also have to integrate the different functional line organizations. Yeah. And that requires an ability, and you speak multiple languages. You need to literally speak different languages to integrate these people. And I find most PMOs are toothless tigers because they kind of have an administrative role, but are they linking the vision and mission of an organization down to the bottom last task? That's what a PMO is for.
This is probably the part of the podcast today that I hope the listeners can take away the most. You nailed something that is so critical to me in everything I've done over the years, which is the word language, right? And we're not talking about the literal language in German and English and Mandarin, etc. We are actually literally talking about even like the word risk that your first speaker and I mentioned earlier, even the word governance, by the way, Mark, right? So one of the things I had to do, the word governance is so harsh, believe it or not, still today in 2023 for some organizations and their leaders and the ones affected by it. Yeah. So over the years, for example, one of my most favorite, and back to the pyramid you described, I love the word alignment, for example. Yeah. Right. And not just because of the shift to agile principles and not because of Spotify and what they have done to really, find that sweet spot, for alignment and so on across their teams and squads and so forth. But the reality is that's what we want to do with the choices we make language wise as well. We want to create some level of alignment. You talked about simplicity already. Yeah. So, behind all the success in PMOs, portfolios, and programs is an element of culture and how the culture, which is really what? It's behaviors and practice. It's really boils down to the leaders. You also, when you make those remarks, in my head, I'm talking about who are these leaders of the future, right? Because again, I am not married today in 2023 to words like project manager, program manager. I think
I think it's the Shu-Ha-Ri concept, right? We've gone through the Shu, we've gone through the formalistic training. We've become masters of our trade, but now the Re means you've got to be able to be at such a level of understanding where you can integrate multiple. So are you familiar with the I, the T, the N, the M development?
I recall that. It's been a while since I got into that because I thought you were going to go into the T-shaped skills, which is different.
No, because you are a perfect. So it used to be I, right? You started in a discipline. You were an apprentice, and you moved up, and you became a master. Like you were an engineer, right? That was your background. Yeah. When was the last time you practiced engineering?
I cannot say on this because I'm going.
But I mean, you have a PhD, right? So you went that classical route, and then you said, well, I want to have more impact with what I do. So you started developing that T base, right?
Right.
Project management, risk management, quality management, communication, team, all that kind of stuff. And then what happens, the end comes about when you say, okay, but now I'm going to learn more about lean, right? And I'm going to learn more about this. And that's the real, I think, future for advanced project managers, is to be able to go through the I, to go through the T, but then also like put down more and more pillars that gives you more languages.
Mark, the future is both scary and super exciting. Yeah, because you even didn't mention the big AI component.
No, I had. Do you know Alyssa Farrow?
Yes.
I had her on a podcast not too long ago. We're just posting her. So that's a hot topic.
Yeah, AI or not, but the reality is, to your point, the only advice for myself or anybody else who wants to practice, especially the next gen, right, is you got to be a sponge. The reality is you're going to have to really be a sponge, like almost nonstop capture of different ways of thinking, working, adjusting yourself almost 100% to realizing these are things I'm going to throw away. These are things I want to keep. And that's how I'm going to progress, right? But I love the analogy you've done. But the reality is the pace by which we need to inject those new learnings and ideas. And that's why I think a big part of the role in the future is innovation and almost creativity on steroids, right?
Absolutely.
You've got to find ways by which we can truly be the ones looked at for creativity around problem solving. I love, some of the ideas like wicked problem solving and some of those things that, you can see around the PMI world.
The way of working you mentioned already, the concept of discipline, agile, there's some interesting thoughts in there. I don't think they always apply. I also think that Spotify has changed its color substantially as well. So there's an evolution there. But you know what I'd like to do? What I'd like to do is because I'm really a big fan of what I've read about your book so far. I'd like to use kind of your book kind of as a guideline to pick your thoughts. Of course, I'm not we don't have the time for you to give us the full download, but I'd like to pick out a couple things I highlighted from your book, and maybe you can kind of set the stage and give us some.
Can I before you go there? Not for anything else, but to just also give you a sense of even though this is my first book as the one author. Last year there was a book with Kersner's, your other cowboy. So we had 3 authors for the last book. The last book actually was called The Next Gen, because that's such a close topic to my heart as well. What are we going to do, for the next gen project manager? So to also correct the fact that I care about project management, we had to nail that first. So next gen PM.
By the way, this is one of my hopes that you're going to finally hook me up with Professor Kurtzner, so I can maybe get him on the podcast as well.
Absolutely. So, but he and I and Ricardo Vargas, who I'm sure you know Ricardo as well, and many of your listeners, we tackled in that book, Next Gen, it's pillars for organizational excellence, right? So we tied it to the organization because that was my passion anyhow. Mm-hmm. I want to anchor things when I do them always to the organization. At the end of the day, that's why even PMI in the past used to have this, mission statement, let's call it, worldwide organizations will embrace, value, utilize project management and attribute their success to it, like a lofty big dream, right? That's gone in a way, other things followed. But that has always and remains my passion. Imagine, because we talked about these CEOs coming and say, the reason my numbers have quadruples and I scaled and did this and that is because of my project and program management capability. Then I checked all the boxes, right? Anyhow, that book is all about cases. It's all about really how organizations tell us what they've done to validate what we 3 thought. This one, which just literally got released at the PMI Summit, is more focused on program management. And I'm sure we're going to get into that. And it's really, again, if you think about the title, is going beyond project management to enable value-driven change.
There's so much more to it. And once again, I keep trying to nail it to a simple cause. I think the simple cause is in the number one characteristic that PMI assigns to projects, and the very fact that they're temporary.
Yeah.
The life cycle issue is something that's difficult to understand, and to put it back to this concept of different language, corporate language, right?
Yeah.
The problem that we have is that we have outputs, we have outcomes, and now if we add the third element to it, if we're talking about sustainable development goals and stuff, also called triple bottom line, is impact.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think if you don't understand these 3 words, and how that they truly assign this value delivery concept that PMI is also trying to sell more and more. Yeah. It's like OPM. It's the big picture. If you're not online with it, I've told this story before, but I'm going to share it with you again because I think it's so hilarious. Many years ago, I was managing an Austrian company that really spent a lot of money, and then I spent many millions training their whole staff. They had 7 subsidiaries in different countries in Europe, and they actually even had the title Project Portfolio Manager, which I'd never seen before until at that time, right? And this guy shared a story with me that during a corporate retreat, he during a coffee break walked up to the CEO, who was a very formidable and well-known person. He had a lot of charisma. He walked up to the CEO and said, "Hi, I'm your portfolio manager. I'd have a couple issues I would like to discuss with you." And you know what? He looked at him. He looked at him in disgust while he was pouring his coffee, and he said, "Leave me alone with that operational crap." And I swear to God, when he told that story, I almost lost it. I'm like, oh my God, here's a company that's literally spending millions. They have 3 different levels of PMO. They have a portfolio manager, and the top executive doesn't understand yes, it's operational, but how this operational ties into his missions, ties into his strategy, ties into his vision. That this wasn't more clear was just fascinating to me.
Mark, great story. And the takeaway also, hopefully for the listeners, please educate your executives, right? I know that's what you think is not part of your job description, whatever it is.
I call it sponsor whispering.
Yeah, I mean, really, you gotta work on the minds of these guys. I mean, these guys maybe have so much distraction and noise and other competing priorities, etc. But at the end of the day, what's the number one priority anyhow? You want to drive ways by which you deliver on your strategic outcomes. And yes, they could be all financial for all I care. That's fine. But you have
to be able to say net present value and know what it means. You don't know what you need. So yeah.
And it's really insane, the amount of change. By the way, speaking of that, another takeaway, pictures.
Yes.
That group really needs it. I wouldn't even talk anymore to these guys. I would really try to put it in 2 slides, 2 pictures that really show end to end from a strategy all the way to achieving outcomes and what is needed there. How are these initiatives? We're not just coming up with initiatives. We're coming up with them because there is clarity of what we want to accomplish and why. Almost reminds me also, Mark, I can't believe it. Like still as common sense, project managers miss the boat once they jump into how are we going to get this thing done? Right. Yeah. I think I'm still firm believer. I also use to scare people off. I usually use the words projects fail before they start, right? Because the reality is they start for the wrong reason. So unless my stack has to be ordered. Why first, then what, then how. The how can include all your fun stuff from who and how much and all that fun stuff. But the reality is you got to nail the foundation. The foundation could be very simple, could take a few moments, could take you weeks, right, to nail that. But at the end of the day, that's where the choices are being made. And that's where it becomes powerful and strategic and not tactical.
I think that the key, you mentioned Simon Sinek, the question why, which is, I'm going to say it in cowboy language, is a classic stupid question. It's not stupid, but I call it stupid questions. I always say the number one superpower that a project manager needs to develop is the courage and the willingness to ask the stupid questions that nobody else dares to ask.
Right.
Because they're not stupid. But they're, everybody's trying to pretend like they're incredible professional. And everybody's nodding their head. Yeah. We know what we're talking about. No, you don't. Unless we deep dive and we really link the different levels of an organization, what their why is, and we open this conversation and we embrace the fact that there is a lot of ambiguity. I think you used the word dance, right? Projects are dynamic. They're ambiguous. They're nonlinear. They're complex in your book, right? And they're emergent. If you don't embrace this as part of the game with fun and with vibrance, then you pick the wrong location.
Not to throw other great thought leaders in the mix, but let's throw Brené Brown as well.
Yes.
Some of the aspects of Brené, as much as you think, oh come on, this is the fluffy stuff and da. Well, I hope your previous guest when she talked about AI, the reality is that's what's going to be left to us.
Yes.
Is our ability to truly empathize, our ability to truly connect and read the room very differently, and realize people are coming at it, stakeholders are on projects so differently in terms of agendas, perspectives, perceptions. If you don't do that, I don't know what value am I going to get out of you, and that becomes really, really, really dangerous as well.
Let me stand up for Alyssa because she wowed me. She really did. I asked her. I tried to nail her down. I wanted her to give me process. Like a roadmap. Yeah. What's the first thing you have to do to implement AI? You know what she said to me? She said, sit down with the organization and find out why they want it and what their real long-term intent is. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of philosophical. But hats off to her. She understood it. She said, listen, if we don't have also a moral compass and principles on why we're doing this, we're getting ourselves into deep water without knowing what the consequences might be.
Yeah, absolutely. If I super support her thoughts there, because if I have to think of one thing, we got to slam the brakes. The more change is going fast around us, the more we have to have that pause button, right? And I'm not saying slow things down. I'm all for speed. Matter of fact, we need to even be faster in our decision-making process and our speed to market and everything else. There's no doubt. Yeah. However, there are those pause moments where you really make those concrete choices and realize, hey, I am not going to run just because everybody else is so wowed by Gen AI or its applications or the fact that it reads my PDF document and allows me to really figure out, the focus areas.
It writes my report that nobody's going to read.
Exactly. So who really cares if I'm not so clear on the value proposition? So she's spot on.
Yeah. So I'm gonna, if I still may, I'm gonna pull out your book because, like I said, I love it. So I think it's a great way to create a little bit of structure. Let's start off with a good stupid question, right? Because you start off your book with this. I think almost every academia starts. So what the heck is a program? Differentiate it for us.
It sounds like also you don't have the hardcover yet because
I'm waiting for it. I couldn't get it. It's not available. I had to look at digital versions and stuff like that. Share the wealth.
Wiley surprised me actually that they were ready.
And I want a signed copy.
Yes, I'm happy to. So, Wiley surprised me that they were ready actually exactly at the summit.
Great publishing house. Yeah. That says a lot already right off the bat.
No, absolutely. So, why program management? Maybe start with adjusting the question to that. I hope that already was clear in our journey so far in the podcast. If I had to make some tough choices, and we're not going to do that here. We're not going to redesign the definition of project. We're not going to, say bye to the PMBOK guide, because also the PMBOK guide is an example of really great material, right? So the shift that happened.
I don't think we need to reinvent that wheel. I think we need to add to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just need to realize, even your comments about beginning and end and all of that, that's all nice and good. And maybe that's semantics, or maybe that stays or not. I don't really care, because we really need to be shifting our attention to value. So the reason I'm attracted to program management is two things. One, everyone does get involved in these initiatives because there is a change that's required. Whether the change is really internal in the organization, whether the change is external to affect our products or solutions coming out to market, whether the change is in terms of how we make our customers' experience fully digital or whatever it is. No matter what the change is, it's a change. Yeah. Programs, because of the level of maturity around typically thinking of the program and its multiple number of interaction points, dependencies, closer links to strategy, etc. But by the way, that may not be the case. Because I've been in cases, Mark, over the years, I was in industries like in the automotive industry where they never use the word project, for example, and some of the big threes and so on. They always use programs. But if you boil it down to it,
the UN is a good example of it. They're getting in the habit of calling things project, but most of the things that they have at the UN are called programs.
Yeah. So again, for me, the attraction was I'm all about creating change. Mm-hmm. Programs are the vehicles for that. Mm-hmm. Programs, because of the preparation and the potential maturity of the person leading those initiatives being higher, that's what attracted me to shift in that space. The reason I mentioned that in the book is I'm not disqualifying projects. You got to nail some of those mechanics, let's call them. You got to nail exactly what it takes to deliver into the future, because I mentioned things like ways of working, and you mentioned things about the agility. We mentioned things about the impact of technology and so forth. All of that's a given. The program is the unifying element of that. The reason I love programs, it unifies all that back to the point about integration. Yep. And that's why in this book, I tackle topics around the PMO, just like you mentioned, right? Yep. I tackle points around the stakeholders, because at the end of the day, that's the unique aspect of success, how we tackle that differently. but I also tackle points in terms of, at the end of the day, what kind of leadership is required into the future. So there's a lot in the book about the quality of the person, because at the end of the day, that's who changes the behaviors.
You're flying over, but I'm going to nail you down on a couple of these because I think there's some good topics. And like I said, you just need to give us a teaser so lots of people buy the book. What I liked about it, and this is, how the PMBOK has always grown over the years, and there's certain knowledge areas that a lot of people they're missing. One of the ones that I've always been a big fan of, and it's in your chapter 1.3, speed and quality of decision making. Ultimately, I think a lot of people forget that project management is a systematic process that ultimately is a systematic approach to create better communication, which means faster and better decisions, which is, I think, the number one contributor and reason why projects go off course.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about why? Because you identified it as one of your passion points. What's your take on why decision making needs to take a better course than it has right now?
I'll very quickly go back in time. So you mentioned my engineering background. I'm a PhD in engineering, and my topic was really around that. And I didn't know at the time anything about portfolio management, right? I didn't know anything about the power of decision making. But the reality is, a big focus of that research was about those key fundamental factors that affect the outcome of your projects and programs. And one of which was, when you take quality as your driving factor, it actually minimizes your cost and schedule growth. That's a choice you make, right? And that's a decision you make early on. And actually, it doesn't slow you down, because when you're focused on quality and what it means in terms of your processes and interactions and controls, etc., you're minimizing the chance of the firefighting and everything else we deal with. Let's talk about today and the book. The luxury we have today is the quality of the data that we have, potentially. It does require responsibility. We have to deal with cybersecurity and all other aspects of intellectual property.
Well, you have to get in the habit of having clean project documentation so that you have lessons learned. Often.
Absolutely. Yeah. But if you have that at your fingertip, think about your role in terms of the decision-making process. If I think, and I'm hoping that came up in your podcast on the topic as well, if I really want to make the best use of data and AI, this is about freeing and creating a very different kind of an individual able to reach decisions fast. That's my point, is that the stuff I used to be spending my time with, let's call it stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is very
wasting
different.
Your time with almost. Not that it wasn't valuable, actually, but it took so long. So it took so much time. That was the big problem. Yeah. The real value of AI is that it crunches big data. Big data by itself is a nightmare.
Yeah. In the book, I use guys like John Maxwell, for example.
Yeah. I love John. I have like 20 of his books. I've actually met him in person.
But the reason it's so relevant to the role of the PM and the leader, as I describe in the book as well, is that finally I have time to think again for a change, right? I mean, he's a big preacher of that. And why do I have that? Because of, again, the access to data differently, the access to hopefully mature processes, etc., the access to AI helping me really streamlining and getting sense out of the data, etc., differently. So what happens? I have time to think again for a change. I can spend my time where it matters the most, which is the interactions and networking with my stakeholders to know exactly where the hot buttons are for decision making. And then bingo. The speed of decision making is very different. The quality of decisions and the effect of those decisions is very different, because, hey, for a change, light bulb comes up. I'm thinking, I'm interacting, I'm including, I'm spending my time where it matters, and truly able to make choices that are very different than in the past.
And the bottom line, regardless of what you call your organization, something excellence or PMO or PGMO or whatever the heck you want to call it, at the end of the day, I think the true value that you provide to the top level of the organization is the ability to crunch data into these 2 or 3 slides, right? So that they can make the right decisions with certainty that they otherwise have to, because I think very few people realize that the number one reason why projects are not in time, budget, or scope is because the decision-making cycles take too long.
Yeah, definitely. And again, in this day and age, that is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Whether you're going to miss an opportunity or miss an acquisition or be in the right place at the right time, etc., that's when you actually, or Mark, the reason I love change, again, people change for 2 reasons. Either A, they see the opportunity, or they're scared. You gotta policy. Exactly. Well, yeah. But you gotta read your audience. If scare them is the key, scare them, right? So it's unfortunate. Yeah.
And your book resonated with me because you have a whole chapter dedicated to it. You have used words like championing change, which I loved. You also alluded to something. A lot of organizations are playing with the word excellence now in different variations, right? OPEX.
Yeah.
I love to take those words, the new bingo words, and jiggle them in my head and see what's the historical basis for it. For me, OPEX in many organizations is the change organization, right? And a lot of people say, well, is that something, and then you have 100 different words for it. You have continuous Kaizen, you have lean, you have Six Sigma, you have business process reengineering, all these different things. But what a lot of people don't realize when we're talking about a matrix organization, we're not talking, modern organizations are never two-dimensional in their matrix. They're usually 3 or 4 or 5 dimensional, which means there's many organizations that go across functional. And change and project management and risk and quality, by the way, are things that definitely would benefit if they cooperated and integrated and aligned themselves with it, because it makes each one of them more powerful in unity in their collaboration. I also see that in your title. I mean, I think you see yourself in your role now, not just as a program or portfolio manager with kind of a project background, but you're also a dedicated change engineer, right?
Actually, in the book, I talk about change scientists.
Yes, right? I saw that word. I love that word, but I don't want to assume what it means. You want to give us a definition of what you mean with that?
It's the integration between the person who is the leader, champion of change, and the data side of things, right?
Yes.
Because you got to be nailing it on the data side, right? And that's why, if you want to be threatened by the data and where the technology is taking us in terms of simulating, in terms of really being very close to, merging the real and the virtual and so on, you're in the wrong place, right? You got to really dismantle all of that. You got to benefit from that, but you got to also make sure to create change. It's about influence, and influence is about truly finding out exactly what those buttons are that need to be really hit hard so that you get the alliances that you need. By the way, when you were talking, there was something that came to my mind that was very interesting. Is you talk about excellence, and also earlier you were talking about mastery. As much as I love those two, some believe it's a destination still today, and that is a shocker, right? I mean, it's a great shock. I mean, just that's why, again, the cowboy mindset with what I interpreted is the ability to adapt and be truly dynamic in terms of realizing, I got to change something in the mix. This recipe is not going to work, right? So it's almost like cooking exercise, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Matter of fact, one of the things I talk about in the book is the concept of the lab, right? Is, to me, programs, just like in projects, actually, that I believe that across all the 3 Ps is really an experimentation lab. It's an opportunity for us to
You have to have hypotheses. You need to test them. If you're going to use adaptability, which is another topic, I think is one of your last chapters, right? Is the ability to make an assumption, live with that assumption until it's no longer relevant or needs to be adapted, right?
Very much so. And also back to the ingredients. I love the cooking exercise, not just because I'm a foodie, but the reality is you got to try different things. Yeah. How I mix the geographies. How about I mix a little bit this and that in terms of the enhancements of maybe adjusting even the amount of technology use versus something else when it comes to decision making. There's a lot to be tested in the lab as well, Mark.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to some of the other things. You use the word, which I haven't heard in a while. I think it's your German background that comes in here. Use the word holistic leader. It's not a term that's often used in the English speaking area. You want to kind of tell us what you mean with holistic leader?
I almost can take that all the way back to my dad. He was really an example of a holistic leader. Holistic leader is, and I'm not going to use the word end to end again, but that's definitely there, is the person who's able to create the distance very easily, right? The person who is able to shift quickly to objectivity when it comes to decision making, because he or she can see beyond what's right in front of us. That person is futuristic. That person is able to, I have a concept also that I love, which is called getting onto the balcony rather than being on the dance floor. The more often you can do this fluidly without thinking about it, the more holistic you're going to be. But also part of that is your style as a leader. Are you truly a servant leader like we've been talking about for years? Do you understand the social leadership required there? You have the capability to humble yourself and learn from just about anyone around your environment. There's a lot there in that kind of a person. So, and of course, the value set is super important in that person. The true belief and the change that's also behind the work that you're doing and the initiatives you're after. Yeah.
I like your definition. One of the things I often I'll put my words that I put it in, and I often say one of the biggest challenges that anybody who is a PPPM has to deal with is the challenge, and it's really difficult to integrate this in your mind, is the ability to have an incredible attention to detail.
Yeah.
Versus keeping strategic overview, and that clash is, I think Agile tried to address it with the product owner and the Scrum Master, or in old project management, the concept of a project manager and a project assistant, or a PO, which that word has fallen out of fashion, but I think it's still relevant. Kind of alludes to how important it is to have people who do the administration, create the framework, and create the background so that you can do what you do. But those are the big challenge, big picture and attention to detail. Those are the secret ingredients of project or program or portfolio management.
Very much so, very much so. And you mentioned assistants and all that. The good news, all of that changed right now. So we have co-pilots and we have that. So all of us have assistants, right? So it frees us to really focus on that other side, which is the strategic side. So to your point, absolutely a lot has changed there. A lot will change. And I think if you look very closely at the dynamics of who's around your project and realize who can put the hat on that's most important for creating the impact that you want out of a change, then you're smart. I mean, there's so much learning outside program and project management that you can take into practice, like De Bono's, for example. Remember De Bono and the six color thinking hat, those kind of principles? I'm a huge believer. Do whatever it takes to ensure that your core team, your extended team, is truly thinking properly, on their feet, able to change, able to adapt, because the world ahead of us, we're going to be needing to adapt on steroid. There's no doubt that this is going to be one of the most fundamental skills into the future. Great
segue to one of the other things that I noted from your index, which was the future of business. You have a segment in your book on 4.1, chapter 4.1, talking about the future of business. You want to give us a quick insight? Where do you think our business is going to?
No, I can't. That's really the magic of going to.
You got to buy the book.
I cannot give it all.
That's good. I'll accept that. But I wanted to point it out because I thought
I'll most likely leave it alone. But I'll say it's a balance between scary and opportunistic, right? Just like the two sides of risk, right? So the future of business,
every detriment is also potential opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So dive into it. There are a lot of cases there as well that were selected for a reason, right? Some of them are really reflecting on some of the old classical barriers that we've always had, but some of them start really looking into some of the future aspects. Numbers, I'm a big believer, just like an industry, 4.0, 5.0, it's all nice, but labeling is not the point. It's really understanding at a given point in time.
I think labeling is the basis. It's the base because I think we still have an issue. And this is the one thing that pisses me off a little bit about Agile. I'm a big fan of Agile, but the problem with Agile is they reinvented a bunch of vocabulary that didn't need to be reinvented. And I think we would do ourselves justice if we would stick to the vocabulary and live it. I think common language, if we cannot create common language amongst us, of course, the language is alive and it adapts and it grows. But I think some of the playing around with words is marketing frivolity. And I think we might do better to maybe stick to some of the old vocabulary.
Absolutely. I'm all for simple, all for alignment. Those two serve us the most. Yeah.
Now, a little bit later in your book, you have a segment in your book which alludes to the skills revolution. Yeah. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, we alluded to some of that, and even when you had your analogy of the I and the other aspect of the T.
Is that where you were going with it?
Oh, absolutely, to a great extent, without even utilizing that. And I think you really, I started this session with the FIT, the fit aspect. Yeah,
you tell us what the FIT stands for again.
Just fit. It's really, your skills revolution. So fit, just like fitting process, fitting ways of working.
Okay, so it's not an acronym?
No, absolutely not. Right? It's literally the fit. And it's a high level of customization. It's high level of adapting to circumstances at hand. So the skills in the future, when you start
I like that word. Now I understand it. Yeah, because I often say, there's no cookie cutter approach to every company is in a different context. And I think that's a true challenge of, for example, converting a standard into your own environment is to be able to fit it. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping, as a takeaway for every part of our discussion, we're talking about fitting language, fitting ways of working, fitting amount of alignment, fitting ways by which I engage, etc. This is the magic. If you can really, truly read, and that's why I love, again, the comment I made about Brene Brown, is that the sensing aspect, right? Yeah. And again, she didn't, she talked about empathy a lot, but there's a lot of other sources like Sense and Respond is another example of a book over the years of, I found interesting and so on, because it gets into the data, but also gets into the human. And it's always going to be that cross walk between the two as well. And that's where the skills also are heading, by the way. That's a lot
what
of
I love about us. I'll exclude you from this statement, but what I love about us old fart project managers is, we're so imbued with processes and tools, and we love those tools. But when we get together at these global conferences, the number one thing we talk about is usually exactly the soft aspect, the human aspect, the emotional and the psychological aspect, which is so important in making projects, programs, and portfolios work.
Very true. And I was thrilled that PMI over the years, recent years, shifted to power skills, just trying to really attempt also to make sure that people put it at the right strategic point. There's not soft skills, it's very powerful. That's what makes the difference. I think these are good pluses. And our passion, and yes, we've been around for a while, but our passion stems from the fact we believe in the potential of this, right? We do believe.
We haven't lost our idealism.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. No matter how
crazy as we might be.
Yeah. No matter how many times we had to get on the couch and talk to our psychiatrist.
Now, we've alluded to this. I don't know whether we need to go into this in any further depth, but I think if we're talking about, being able to speak different languages, in chapter 8, you kind of refer to benefits management, right?
No, it's almost like I had to. That's part of speaking the language. So I had to, even though I could see value as a much stronger word than benefit, because again, benefits, there's a lot about it. And even PMI, there's this, the entire practice around benefits realization, everything else you can dive into. But ultimately, it goes back to the core principle. If you don't know why you are really making that choice and that investment.
And that why could be on 3 different levels or in 4 different levels, in mid-term, short-term, mid-term, long-term.
Absolutely. And that's why you make it strategic, and that's why you tie it to benefits, but ultimately really understanding how to dialogue around benefits, how you have a concise plan for that, how you can tie that plan to the adaptability you need to have along the way. The ownership is the most important element of this. One of the fundamental reasons projects and programs fail sometimes is that even if we nail it, I could tell you so many stories in my career. One that sticks with me the most is, one time with a big pharmaceutical organization in Germany, I was, I had the option to be in Germany again. I said, hey, can we visit, have lunch together? I said, absolutely, come on in. And it's for work that was already delivered, right? And the consultancy year, the work was done. They signed the check. They were super happy, et cetera, and so forth. And I thought, check the box and everything else. But it was one of the toughest meetings of my life. They actually were super unhappy. And that was not, immediately even after the completion of that work. It's sometime after. And the reason of their unhappiness is I missed the true benefit behind it. The benefit was not the outcome and the assessment and the recommendations. The benefit was, can you help us melt down the resistance we have internally with our stakeholders when it comes to that unified solution that they wanted to implement at that point in time? It was never in the statement of work, was never da-da-da. So what I'm saying here is what? Ownership of benefit and your ownership of knowing what truly matters beyond the written words, beyond what was communicated. That's where the real leadership and the kind of new skills I need to have. I need people, including myself, who are really going to push for that and not going to be satisfied with, oh, that's what my boss said, or that's what my customer alluded to, etc. Always peeling the onion further to go right to the core. What matters the most? That's very, very powerful for our success. Yeah.
I have one client PMO that I've been working with for many decades now, and they originally sold their value to upper management. It took them some time to get executive sponsorship.
Yeah.
They also followed my rule. I have this rule for sponsors. Who's your sponsor? And my guideline is it needs to be a god or a demigod or a prophet, because otherwise there's no oomph behind it. They actually managed to get executive sponsorship, and they actually sold. Sometimes it's the simple arguments that make you pertinent. They sold themselves to upper management. Says, you know what, we have on average 360 IT projects of various sizes per year, and they cost a certain amount of money, but we don't know what the return of investment is, and the projects end, and the project manager goes away. So who's monitoring outcome and impact?
Yeah.
And that's how all of a sudden the board members like, yeah, we need that. And then everybody was like looking at, are you going to do it? I'm not going to do it. Who's going to do this for us? And that's how they sold. That was, it's funny. They had they had like 50 slides they were showing, and then it boiled down to one slide that broke the ice. And that's where the board finally says, now we understand what you're good for. Keep it up, right? Inform us. We want to hear on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. That's how they broke the ice and started getting the awareness that they needed.
Yeah, and the amount of creativity on that benefits topic, Mark, is limitless, basically, because I've seen organizations take it all the way to even have like a benefit steering group or something like that. That really having that ownership there, because
there's a lot of potential there.
There's a lot of potential. You really want to have that thread of ownership. But again, back to, I don't want to overuse the end to end, but that's part of the journey. Yeah. The end is not the end of the investment. The end is not even the end of the program. The end ultimately is how that truly fits the bill in terms of achieving the outcomes and the value.
And I would probably say, as far as lateral learning, for most of the project managers that I coach on an operational level, the financial aspect is one of the most difficult things that they need to learn. I don't say you don't have to be a financial manager, but you have to know the basics. You need to know what your burn rate is. You need to know what your break even is. You need to know when somebody throws the word net present value or internal rate of return or average rate of return, you can't freak out. You got to at least hang with the big boys and girls. And maybe even, that you said 2 slides. If I have a good J curve that shows my return of investment, I've got everybody on board.
Yeah. Now you're nailing the definition of a holistic leader. I don't need to say anything. Mic drop.
Good. Let's go on to, and I was really thrilled about this. One of him as well, Thomas Valenta.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Thomas Valenta over the last years and I've followed him on LinkedIn. I've known him for a long time. He's a big proponent and fan of the VUCA concept, and I see that you've also included VUCA and variations of it in your chapter 9. Anything you want to add to it? Because you added 2 Ds to the VUCA.
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely. That's, and again, we don't need to necessarily dive so much into it, but the reality is we want to be, so one of the pet peeves that sometimes we deal with is that we have this, closed mindset or the rigid mindset, right? That does not remain in the future. When I say rigid mindset, it's also about the rigid ways by which we think we can deliver on these projects and programs. So this entire, and the variations of the book, and you can read more about it in the book and other sources online. This is the reality of it. We always knew that there's a level of uncertainty and complexity, right? But
that's an assumption on your part because you're so deep in the material. I think it's so obvious to us, but I think a lot of organizations don't understand that that's what we serve as. I always say that the simplest definition of a real project is a Greek word called chaos.
Yes, I love it.
The absence of order and the absolute abundance of possibility.
Yeah.
And project management, program management, portfolio management is the attempt to bring order to chaos so that we can monopolize off it.
Yeah, and Mark, that's why I hope you connect the dots back to the point about thinking and what I talked about earlier. To me, 2 things are very important: is that your ability to apply all the combination of skills that are fitting back to the fit, right? To really get some sense out of the madness. But what I need in the future is I need better thinkers. Yeah. Not thinkers in the context of like these are gurus sitting somewhere on top of the mountains, but thinkers in terms of on their feet, adapting to the changing dynamics that will always increase in speed. There's a terminology we use sometimes nowadays in Siemens, like what's called clock speed. That's the speed by which we need to operate at while we don't drop the ball on what's really fundamentally important. And
you're talking about such an important thing that I think also most people are so aware of subconsciously that they're not aware of it consciously.
Yeah.
If line organizations are the most effective and efficient way to do simple things, what a lot of people don't realize, it's like most pilots fly on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
Line organizations fly on autopilot.
Yeah.
Project management is when you hit turbulences and your autopilot, you can use the PMBOK or whatever standard or book, whatever, but that's not gonna solve all your problems.
I love the analogy. Spot on.
You have to be able to really fly the plane. And I think a lot of people are shocked by how much implicit influence, power, or expectations are bestowed on them, that they're befuddled. Does the organization really want me to think for them? Yeah, that's your job.
Yeah. And that's why the changing job of the future of the PM, it's really be central. And if you're not equipped to do that, thank you very much. Please make other choices, because that's what we need the most of, more than anything else. I need people who already operate at the level of being the executive. With those champions of change we talk about in the book and elsewhere in practice, we really need to make sure that you realize that's the role. You're not going to wait to have a title of an executive or anything else to be operating at such level, because my dream, just like maybe your dream, I want to see all C-suites in the future being filled by folks who really have the scars from the project and program trenches, because that's ultimately back to the holistic view, back to the end-to-end, etc. Who else is in a better position? And again, maybe still idealistic, but it's something that we have to nail. Now, and we are responsible for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, with your I mean, it's been over 30 years that you've been practicing what you practice. You've also been several times in the role of a consultant. I think probably people would love to hear this if they had an opportunity to invite you on a drink or a cup of coffee. What are 3 recommendations that you might pass on to other PMO end-to-end program office managers if they could pick your brain? What would be 3 things that you would give them as a piece of advice on how they can master their horizon better?
You would think I should be ready for answering a tough question like that. There's a ton. No, speaking of 3s, there are a lot of 3s. Before I answer your question, there are a lot of 3s, and even like some of the classic 3s that I love. There's 2 3s that I love before I really get to really answering your question that are critical to my DNA. One is what's called the power of the 3H, right? The 3H being the head, the heart, and then the hand. Truly, from a strategic standpoint, I love that analogy that I heard over the years from other colleagues and so forth, is that you want to make sure it's making sense. That's where the business case and that's where the data and everything else falls in. The heart is really truly the passion and the connection. And then the hand is the execution. We always focus so fast on improving execution when in fact the basis is wrong. In our language also, the portfolio in the selection is wrong. The other one is the 3 Ps around, the 3 Ps, which is passion, persistence, and patience, right? So it's really the qualities.
The third one is important.
As old that is, this has been around for a long time, but the reality is, without the first and the last, you're hosed, but also in the middle, because you're in the VUCA environment we were talking about, you got to persist through.
I've got one more P for you.
Yeah.
Pushing.
No, yeah. Well, that's kind
of
the way
the envelope.
You could put that under persistence, and you're right. You got to stretch, you got to scale.
Yeah.
So back to your core question, I think over the years, I would say tip number 1 is making sure, back again to what has been a theme throughout our discussion today, you got to nail exactly the element of the purpose behind what you're doing, right? I mean, it's not rocket science, but at the end of the day, my first tip in consultancy and everything else is minimize the level of excitement. I'm not trying to be negative about it, but if you can hold yourself back, I did talk about the power of pause earlier. If you hold yourself back and make sure, put aside that celebration aspect of it, right? And focus on truly understanding, why are we even sitting at the table together at that given point in time, right? Because especially if you landed the business already, if you're a consultant or you got a product sold already to a customer, etc., and now it's time to really do the hard work of implementing, it's so hard to stay away from that excitement. So step number 1, cool it, basically, in the language of being kind of a cowboy. Step number 2, which is really important that affected me over the years, make sure you are talking and working with the right people, right? Because at the end of the day, one of the worst things we've seen in projects and programs is that as much as we say, oh, it's a given, of course I know my stakeholders. No, we don't. No, sometimes the most influential have nothing to do with the ones even on your radar. I've been in so many cases where literally a guy on the shop floor somewhere knew exactly what we needed to do differently in the manufacturing environment to change exactly the level of satisfaction of our customers, and not a single person listened to him or her. I mean, you still remember the classic NASA story and the janitor being part of the team. I mean, that's the powerful aspect, to know exactly that. And then the third one is really work on becoming a completely humble, truly, as we talked about the sponge earlier today, like, don't act like you know it all. Don't assume you know it all, because again, the sources of information and the data and the changing nature within which you operate in the environment, if you want to sustain, if you want to scale, if you want to do all those kinds of things, you want to be in a position where you are like in a non-stop learning mode. I mean, those are not your classical recommendations about really how.
No, I love them. I would not. All I would say is you've once again reaffirmed a belief system. I call it the cosmic paradoxes. When two contrary thoughts, like we use the example of big picture versus attention to detail, then you refer to the concept. You got to be able to push. You got to be charismatic. You got to be out there. You need to put yourself out there. But on the other hand, I love the fact that you mentioned this is the number one criteria that I use when I look at. There's a lot of online gurus who are, but the number one way I measure people like Simon Sinek or Brene Brown is, do they have an element of humility in them? And I find that the true profound thinkers in the world are completely committed and completely convinced and have an amazing way to contextualize their thoughts and experiences. But if you meet them offline or you give them a moment to breathe, they have a profound level of humility. And I think that's such a huge part of this term that you also use, the concept of servant leadership. I think it especially in this social media world where everybody's, I'm bigger than life. I think humility is a huge factor. So I think that's a great concept.
And if I may, Mark, when you talked about this as well, so it's really also, we didn't talk about authenticity much today, but really truly being real about it. And actually, the future needs more what I call, and many others actually use that, and people, and A&D,
yes.
Right? Spending the time to really debate and dialogue why this is not going to work, etc. I'm not disqualifying that important critical thinking, but I also want to make sure you place enough focus on that versus truly, okay, so how can we build? And people are always building. They're always very positive. They're always spending less time.
You have to have faith. We have to be almost not blind, but almost a semi-blind faith in what you're doing. But you've also, it's another cosmic paradox, is the ability to step back and be utterly critical. I was going to ask you, because you from your cultural background, you span this culture. I'm a big fan of the Middle Eastern culture, and I've been exposed to it through my childhood and also through my business life. But I think one of the most challenging markets sometimes to deal with, because they're so overboarding in their enthusiasm and also in the ability to finance projects. I have a lot of project managers that come and say, but we have to have a crucial conversation. Can I have it in this culture? What's your experience there?
It's a great point, because if I had to pick another quality that's so important in the future, is to be more courageous, right? Yeah. We do need leaders who are more courageous. So back to culture and back to, classic stories I used to have, like the ugly American landing in Riyadh, for example, and jumping right to business, etc. Can I have crucial conversations? Absolutely, yes. But you got to really read the room. That's another one that, Erin Meyer is a beauty, right? And so Erin Meyer is not really from the project field, but when she looks at the culture map and looks at some of the dimensions across those cultures, I think I even probably refer to her in the book as well. The reality is, A, back to the learning, you got to nail that. B, if you're not having the crucial conversations, well, maybe it goes back to my second recommendation. Are you talking to the right people? And are you getting the attention of the right people? Right. So I would say be very courageous about saying, time out. I respect your culture. I respect we need more time maybe to build the trust, etc. But because of your own sake, it's not about me. The leaders of the future are not about me kind of people, right? It's about really what is going to matter to those stakeholders. So I would say just be a bit more courageous, understand the culture better.
I would agree with you.
If you don't know how to really works, ask someone who does, including finding who is it that has the ears and the attention of the executive and that particular agency or organization. I mean,
and knowing when to have offline conversations. And I think most important, especially in most regions, culturally, have you taken, and this is what I love about GCC countries is, you don't start off with business right away. You start creating a relationship. They want to know you first. They want to know, who am I talking with? And I find, this goes back to your question, one hand pushing, but on the other hand, having patience to let things develop, because only if you have a true, cultural bond, even if you come from a different culture, can you have some of these crucial conversations.
Yeah, and that's no different really. There are of course degrees of differences, but every culture you will succeed more if you can build the relationships. How you build that in one culture compared to another is going to vary. But there are so many similarities. We're all humans at the end of the day. We all have an interest either in getting an initiative to succeed or fail, right? So hopefully you're in the first group and the second group. If you're really after the failing an initiative, then I need to find out who those are as well, and maybe having another crucial discussion with ones who can help you be protected from that. But you gotta read the room. That's why I'm so much of a fan of the skills of the future, being more capable of sensing, being able to think more holistically, being able to really connect the dots in terms of some of those gaps that otherwise keep taking those transformation initiatives to a failure land, which is not acceptable.
Since some of the sentiment you've mentioned reminds me of a book that I just recently picked up in the airport, and I think you'll smile when I give you the title, because some books, when you read the title, you already know the book. You don't even have to read it anymore, but you read it anyways just to get your
hello.
Like, the classical Stephen Covey book, The Speed of Trust. You read the title and you know exactly what's in the book. The book that I picked up recently was called The Messy Middle. You feel it?
Yeah,
right?
I can relate.
It's great. I'll have to look up his name. We'll put it in the link. But it's a guy, a startup manager who created a system, an online system to kind of network artists, and it was called Enhance, and it was picked up by Adobe for a lot of money. And he's one of those startup famous people who made a lot of money, and then he's now basically a startup company. He finances startup companies and stuff like that. And I thought his book was great because when I read his book, I don't think this guy's ever heard of PMI. I don't think he's ever heard of the PMBOK Guide. But he wrote with such human passion about, he says, one of the big challenges that we have is it's important to have a plan. It's important to plan, but if you don't understand that the plan is not going to come exactly the way you want, and everybody's in love with, you mentioned it before, and everybody's in love with the destination, and we don't realize that life is about the journey. And he says, and everybody applauds me for what I did with my company, but in reality, nobody knows the years of agony and pain that I had to endure, and how when we were despondent and our team was ready to give it up. How do we That's where the real the proof of the ability to implement is at home, right? So that's I think you'd like that book. It's called The Messy Middle.
Oh, I love it. And it also reminds me again with my passion for the next generation, and my small concern about the next gen is the realization of the journey side of things. See, the next gen is so much into the land of, hey, still I want to achieve those successes faster yesterday and I wonder if that third P of patience along the journey and enjoying the journey is something that may be a quality we need to work on for our next generation. I hope I'm wrong, but that's definitely something that has to be improved.
I think I'm very impressed with many aspects of the new generation. There's some things that irritate me because I've got two young sons in that age. They sometimes like to pat me on the head and tell me I'm an old white man who's no longer relevant. I said, listen, I've forgotten more than you guys learned. I think where the patience comes in for us old PM cowboys is, I think, and this is something we need to take serious from a management perspective. I think a lot of senior managers are intimidated by the rapid development of technology, that we're not courageous enough in mentoring and teaching, because we feel, some of us, are we still relevant? We're absolutely relevant, because I think the number one purpose of bygone generations or generations that are moving forward is we don't want the new generations to make the same mistakes that we made.
Yeah.
We're the purveyors, we're the collectors of a lot of knowledge. Yes, a lot of the new stuff the young people have to develop. It's going to be their innovation. But some of the basics, some of the foundational concepts, I think that's really important that we pass that on to them.
And that's part of the openness of the mindset. We cannot see it from our own lens. That's why when I catch myself going there, I have to stop myself, because also they have other sides that I find phenomenally important for the future. The innovation side,
their idealism is huge too.
Yeah, and entrepreneurship as well. Yeah. They are really able to nail some of the things that from a true startup mindset and those kinds of aspects, that's where some of the impatience actually can help, because they want to test more and fast, and some of the agile principles even can be seen as a living proof almost of that these things can work, right? So I'm optimistic for sure. I just want to make sure when it comes to some fundamental aspects pertaining to that flexibility that's going to be required around these initiatives, that we find a way to pass that on as well if we can. Yeah.
Al, I'm cognizant of your time. I know that you've got a busy schedule. I want to say thank you so much that you've taken time. We could probably talk for many hours on end. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to follow up at another time. But I think this is a good spot maybe to kind of do our end loop and do our last statements. I want to thank you so much for your time. I also want to thank you for your collegial friendship over the years and always staying in touch. I always love to follow up and see you from a distance. But there's one thing that it might be an end topic, which might be interesting since we're talking about a little bit PMOs and stuff like that. There's some new development on the PMO horizon, also with PMI. Any comments or statements where that's concerned?
No, it's very fresh, and the acquisition PMI has recently done, I think, is fantastic. I mean, it really puts a statement.
It was the missing link, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a huge passion for many of the practitioners, and I think it's great. And literally, as I mentioned to you, I was also involved in some of the PMO insights discussions and so forth that happened at the summit. I think the future is bright when it comes to that statement.
If I can just interrupt you quick, for those who are listening who say, what the hell are they talking about?
What the hell are they talking
about? I said one of the things, if you look at the portfolio of standards of PMI has always been a big proponent of PMOs, but they had no standard on it, kind of formally. They had no certification. And now they've recently partnered and bought up one of the larger PMO organizations.
PMOGA, PMO Global Alliance. And Medico is the kind of the center of leadership when it comes to that. So obviously for him also, that's a great evidence that this actually is an important vehicle. A community of PMOs from around the world and really thought leadership around that topic. And so I'm hopeful because I'm also a huge fan of thought leadership, right? That this kind of an alliance creates also high focus on almost disrupting and refocusing the thought leadership when it comes to that space, because ultimately you want to get that right, because that's what cascades into certification standards, but most importantly to practices, right? The clarity by which, just like how we started the journey together, you and I today, and where we are now, the level of adapting that to the changing needs of the future, that's what makes me more excited and hopeful about that kind of a big step in the right direction.
I think that's interesting. Last question. You're going to be in Dubai this coming January?
Maybe not. It depends on a lot of other competing demands. But actually, the region, you talked a lot about the region, and I was recently also in the GPMF, the Global Management Project Management Forum, that's now headed by the PMI KSA kind of efforts.
I saw there's a lot of things happening there.
So the region and that event, of course, the Dubai International Project Management Forum is an example of many that are really pushing the agenda quite hard. So
I'm one of the peons that gets to present there. So if you're there, I'd love to go have lunch or dinner with you.
Looking forward to staying in touch. It's fantastic that we picked up again, almost like it was yesterday. So Marcus, thank you so much for having me. And I'm hopeful that there are some key nuggets. Again, look at the context behind what we discussed today if you are on the listening side, and just pick again back to fit. What fits your needs the most at that part of your journey.
Al, thank you so much.
Much appreciated as well.
All the best.
Take care.
Thanks.